Hey Group 4, how's it going? Rachel here to run to vlog number 7, presented by AC. Sorry, my voice is really weak today, so I'm going to do my best, but I'm excited to respond to your vlog, AC. You had a few different things that I'm excited to talk about. So the first one that we had for vlog number 7 today, AC, you presented a few different questions. The first one was, do we need to develop a social class model? And I guess in the Evans text, there isn't a social class model presented. However, there are other social class models that do exist. I think like one of the most famous would be like Bourdieu. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I'm not very good at French, but Bourdieu, who I guess if I'm recalling correctly, talked about social class and was all about the development of capital, and the idea of social class was, or social capital, being like your ability to kind of affect change was, or to like do things maybe, was influenced early on by your inherited like economic capital, thus like perpetuating social class abilities. And I guess I think he was influenced heavily, if I like remember this correctly, was influenced heavily by like Karl Marx, who came up with the idea of like society, and the way that social classes come about. I think for me at least, Karl Marx is probably like the most famous, but I do think that like Bourdieu would be the most relevant to what we were talking about. And then finally, I guess probably like Weber, Max Weber, not like the Weber, not Lynn Weber, different Weber. Who I had to look this one up because I remember it being mentioned but couldn't like recall a lot of the specifics. But in this, he talked about like the like symbolic systems and the creation of social orders. So I don't know. I guess to your, do we need to develop social class models? I think the social class models exist. I think the importance lies now with the like personal development of students who identify with a certain social class, whereas I guess like the psychological development associated with their identity in that is something that needs to be continually expanded, because I don't know that there's like that as an option. However, I guess the idea of like the word social class, so in the Evans text, it didn't specifically address like a social class identity, but I think as far as I could tell, or what my idea behind that is because class privilege and social identity, social class is such a loaded word. If you look on the Evans text, I think would kind of support this, is that with this, social class has so many different facets to it. On page 240, it talks about class privilege is shaped by the intersections of identity, including race, gender, sexuality, and geography. So if I had to pick a reason why I don't think that it exists in the sense of like a student development theory model, is because that term is so loaded and requires so much further explanation and understanding. And however, I do think that having a model like that would help kind of inform the way that we work with students. So two different answers to that, and not a very concise way. All right, so the next piece that I wanted to respond to was the second question that you had about the melting pot of the United States. And I think certainly the melting pot is something that we heard when we were like kids growing up, but I think really it's the way that is best suited to describe cultural identity in the United States to children, maybe, but I think as we get older and have a more complex understanding of identity and oppression and the different layers that come with that, I think the melting pot is sort of a good way to describe that to children, but it becomes too simplistic for what we need as an adult, or in, I guess, even in adult working world. So I've come up with the possibility of another analogy that might provide a better framework, I guess, a better analogy, because I think it's a little bit more complex. So bear with me here. I'm going to see if it works out. So I came up with the idea of, instead of being a melting pot, because I think a melting pot really destroys the otherness that the United States has. So it erases difference and kind of creates like a system of equality, but maybe not equity. And I think everyone's heard like the shoe analogy for that. So my idea was that instead of being a melting pot, that we would be like a stew. So here, let me just work on this and see if it comes together, okay? So in a stew, there's a few different pieces. I think first is like the, I don't know, broth or whatever. I don't know. I never really ate stew as a child, but so I think of like the liquid surrounding everything. And that is sort of like the foundational principles that the United States is based on. And I base this idea on the Cerullo text, in which she talks about, Karen Cerullo talks about on really early on, 386, the we-ness of the group and how we create like a collective identity. So for me, the broth would be like this collective identity. So it would be like our founding principles, like on like religious freedom or separation of church and state. So like the big founding overarching principles that join us together. And capitalism, I guess, would probably be in there too. So in the diagram where we did the circles, this would be like the biggest overarching themes, okay? But in this stew, it's not all good things, okay? It's not like all good things that we're proud of. Also embedded within this broth, I guess, would be oppressions that people experience. So heterosexism, able-body privilege, racism, classism, these are also embodied because it touches everything, okay? Then in a stew, there's also like chunks of stuff, right? Like carrots and chunks of meat usually. I don't know. This is why I don't know that much about it. But there's usually like chunks of stuff that are floating around, okay? And in this, that's sort of like the different identities that people experience. So again, like the fabric of American society, along with the oppressions and heterosexism and stuff, are touching all of these different identities. So like chunks of things might be identities like woman or African American or LGBT or able-bodied, and all of those are like the different pieces that kind of create the richness and contribute to the society, but not necessarily in a homogenous way. Okay, so in this stew, I'm going to keep going with this. There's, I guess, some different pieces. Maybe the stew isn't stirred enough or something, or like it's left to sit and just like sit on a burner or in a crock pot or something, I don't know. And there are pieces of it that are maybe like in the middle or the top that are like a good temperature, everything's working, it's all okay. But then there are like pieces at the bottom that are kind of left behind and are burned and like not good. And I think this is the result of, here's my next piece, social justice, which is the spoon. So we need like social justice to come in and like mix everything around so that people at the bottom don't get burned, I guess, and left behind in the stew. I don't know if that analogy totally worked, but I guess because for me, like the idea of like the melting pot was so troublesome, I really feel like I needed to come up with a new one, and I'll have to ruminate on this a little bit more because I still feel like that's a little bit iffy. But that was my idea. So anyway, so there were two other questions. Sorry, I don't want this video to get too long, but I did want to respond to the last two questions. The third question that you had was from the Weber text about social power structures. Can they change? And in the Weber text, let me find my place. On page 20, the third theme, I guess, of it was that power relationships can change. I guess the kind of takeaway message that I got from this was that there are power structures that exist, and but however, throughout history they do change. There is the opportunity to change, and I think there's a lot of examples that are presented in here. It talks about a little bit touching on like race, class, gender, and sexuality as being historically significant, and I think it would be easy for us to kind of come up with ways that power structures have changed. I don't think that they always do. I think, at least not in like the present, we don't have historical context for them yet. So I'm not saying that they never will, but I think it would be easy for us to sort of come up with ways that this can happen. And I think power structures come in a lot of different ways, whether it's defined power structures like legal laws, like slavery, or not allowing women to vote, that sort of stuff. That was a power structure that was well defined. However, I think that there are other ones, like it talks about in here, the changing of the perception of like LGBT people from being like weird and abnormal and other to being more mainstream and more less ostracized for that identity. So yes would be the answer to that. Okay, so trying to keep this quickly. So your last question was, can I eliminate social constructions in my role? I think, well, I would like to work in college student housing like I do now, but I guess I was drawing from the reconceptualizing the model of multiple dimensions of identity article, and in this it talks about the social construction of identity, which is that it's a common theme among a society. So I guess that being said, I don't think that it would be a reasonable expectation that I could change social construction. In fact, I think it would be pretty naive for me to say that I could. I do think that the role of student affairs professionals is to kind of mitigate the negative effects associated with social construction. So doing things with a social justice focus that are equitable to students would be the role, not necessarily changing social construction. So I'm going to wrap it up here because we're getting pretty long and I've done a lot of clips. So thanks everyone. I'll see you tomorrow in class. Have a good night. Bye.